So what I want to talk about now is different execution paths through your code in that, and giving the code to what some people call branch or do something different based on the information that it encounters. Some people call these control statements, some people call them branching structures. I'm just going to call them ifs. All right. So I have my three core tools: variables, ifs, and loops. And so this is dealing with these concepts called ifs. Hey, if I encounter this value, do something different. So what I want to do is just review what our code's been doing so far. All right. So far we've only learned about variables and that. And so our code starts, and there's a bunch of statements that execute in sequence. And it may pause, waiting for us to type something in. But basically the path for the code's been set. And as those instructions get executed, our code will eventually complete and our program will end. So what I want to talk about now is different ways to use what I call an if else, or an if with a bunch of else ifs, multipaths in that. So first one, we'll talk about sort of a single if without a companion else part, and definitely not if else. So we're just talking about an isolated if in a program and how that's used. You can use it however you want if it helps you solve a problem. But classically, it's sort of like an optional path. There's still this one core path through your code, but every once you want some optional stuff to happen. Maybe it's setting a default value if it hasn't been set, or maybe it's like a classic thing would be printing out extra information, like if you're in a debug mode. So if debug is turned on or debug's at a certain level, lots of commands on the command line usually have a -v option or verbose option. So what happens is lots more information is printed out as the program is running. So that's sort of like an optional thing. It's not critical or core, but if a flag is or a switch is turned on or a flag is set, there's another way to say that, we have some extra stuff that happens. So a little bit extra, right? We do a little bit of extra stuff, but it is kind of optional to what the core program is doing. So this will be what I call like an isolated if without an else statement. It's this optional path. And where we see a lot, debugging options, verbose options, we do a little bit of extra, right? Maybe, like I said, a default value is not set, so we set it to 0 or some other default that we may have in mind. And so, but our code still follows this core path, okay? And then it finally ends once it completes. The next sort of execution path is we have a start, but we have a major branch in our code, and we're either going to go down path 1 or go down path 2. And so what it is there's our program can now run two different ways. That's one way to think about it. And what you'll see in code is this if-else structure. If a certain condition is met, we go down path 1. Else, we go down path 2. So now our program can run two different ways. And maybe it produces a result and maybe it doesn't, or it produces a different result depending on what it encounters. So some data will come in from a user. Later on we'll work with files and that, or maybe we get some data from a database or a web page. And based on that data, we do something different depending on what we encounter. So we have this ability to branch and go down path 1 or go down path 2. Now typically the paths are mutually exclusive. You only get to go down one of these paths. Okay? And so based on what the program encounters and based on how you set up the logic, you'll either go down path 1, if, or you go down path 2, else. And then your program will eventually end. The next structure I want to talk about is the multipath. So we have our start just like before. But what it is we have a series of paths. Okay? And that. And so depending what we encounter, maybe we go down path 1, or maybe we go down path 2. Maybe we go down path 3. Maybe we go down path 4. Okay? And maybe we go down path 5. And so, and again, these are mutually exclusive, right? And what I used to say in other courses, right? You go down the path that's first true for you. So the first one that trips true for you, maybe the data you encounter or what the user types in, well, it would be true for path 3 or 4. But it's whatever one you test first that results in true. that's the one you go down. Okay, in that. So we just have to be very careful. We can have issues with our logic where we're blocking ourselves from getting to a certain path, and that because another one is tripping true. So whatever trips true, you do, right? And it's the first one that trips true for you that you do. And that. And again, mutually exclusive. You're going to go down one of these. You're not going to go down a bunch of them. Hey, I want to go down 3, 4, and 5. Well, no, you only typically get to go down one in that. And so you go down the path that first trips true for you. But you can set these up in your code with these if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else structures and that. And then you can have what I call a multipath. So instead of having just a two-way street, you know, we have a three-way street, a four-way street, which sounds kind of crazy in that. But it allows your code to handle, right, different sets of data in different ways, depending what it encounters. So what if I encounter a point? I do something different than a multi-point, than a line versus a multi-line versus a polygon or a multi-polygon. And maybe I do something different if it's 2D or if it's 3D. Maybe my calculations are slightly different and that sort of thing. So there might be a thing where you set up a whole bunch of different options. What happens if I encounter a triangle, a tin, that sort of thing. And so you can set up your code differently to handle these different scenarios. But eventually, the way we're writing code, we will come to the end of our program and it will complete. But the path we took from start to end could be different. That's all for now.